one microphone, but we also have spare batteries ready if anything happens. Yeah, right at the bottom. You might want to wait till we're. That work? You might want to turn it off.
Yeah, definitely.
You're not good enough.
Are you all set?
Good.
Oh, we're all
Okay.
set. No, he's back.
Right.
Okay. Sue told me to do that. Well, welcome to the Troy City Council Public Safety Committee meeting, March 12th, 5:30. Thank you for all attending in the chamber. And also anybody watching on YouTube, we do live stream these and it's available for you to see at any time. And we'll start out with the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge of Allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We'll do the roll call. Of the Public Safety Committee, we got Councilmember Soriano,
Here.
Councilmember Katie Splain McLaren.
Present.
Okay, I am the chair. I am here. Also, we have Councilmember Keel,
Present.
Councilmember Vera,
Present.
Councilmember Brosnan.
Present.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you. Well, tonight we're here to get a presentation of what I'll just shortly call the long-awaited study of the Troy Fire Department. I want to recognize our presenters tonight. They're going to present and talk about this study. We have Chief Salucci is with us, the chief of our fire department, our mayor, Carmelo Mantello, and Mr. Charles Jennings from Manitou Incorporated, who did this study. Thank you. Thank you all for attending and appearing before us tonight. You know, I just want to say, you know, the study's here. It's very welcome. We've been waiting a long time. As I said earlier today, I was on the ambulance the first day it came. And in the months it started, it wasn't always the smoothest thing, but I was there right at the beginning. I was a retired fire captain paramedic. Many times in my career, I've been in situations where I jump rigs and we left, you know, crucial apparatus sitting there on the floor. You know, I always think of truck one, medic one is one that's a real outlier and it sits there. And now with the huge increase of apartments, we've got a huge uptick in new apartments, and many are low income. And as they point out rightly in the study, those people often use 911 as their main source of healthcare. That, along with the extended wait times, has created a much different situation than when I was on the fire department and I was manning an engine and jumping to an ambulance. It's much different now. So something has to change. This is obviously the first step. This is a good thing. We got the presentation of the study tonight. We'll be hearing about what not only a study, but what the next step is and our task force and what that's going to look like. I just want to say a personal opinion about the task force. I keep saying this. We, of course, need experts in the field, and we need a member of the administration. We, of course, need the chiefs on this, which they will be, because you know they have their things they have to deal with every day with this situation and what's going on in the fire department. But please make sure that we have captains that are in these firehouses and that are jumping these rigs. They're the guys that are going to tell you what it's really like out there, what it's like jumping rigs, what it's like waiting 1 to 2 hours to hand a patient over. Let's make sure that we pick some really good people and put that on the task force. That being said, I'll hand it over to the mayor. Thank you, and let's get started.
Much,
Majority Leader and Pro Tem Casey and Chairman. Thank you to the City Council. As the Chairman mentioned, the Chief is with us, so I'm just going to give a super quick overview, then the Chief, and then Gary Favreau, who's retired UFA president. More importantly, it was Gary's brainchild 30 years ago, which started the city-run ambulance. So to just take a step back, coincidentally, I was on the city council as District 3 council member at that time. I tell everyone I was in my teens. But back in the 90s, similarly to today, there was a crisis finding workforce, folks to enter into ambulance service, whether it be volunteer, whether it be paid. Fast forward 30 years later, we're there again. There is a crisis all throughout New York State, throughout the region. We see it. The county actually had the towns and others join a meeting just a few weeks ago. A couple hundred people packed the room. They have an ambulance crisis out in the rural areas and some of the towns. Other municipalities are calling us now with that foresight of Gary and folks 30 years ago. Thankfully, they did enter into the whole city run ambulance, and we are where we are today because of that foresight. However, 30 years later, as the council member and the retired firefighter Tom Casey mentioned, Lieutenant, he saw firsthand the demographics have changed over 30 years, the population has changed, but yet we're still running that same ambulance model. So the good thing, we're ahead of the curve. The not so good thing, we need to look at that model. We need to look, obviously, at our staffing. We were on the verge of bankruptcy back in the 90s. We took office and a control board came in immediately. The MAC was dissolved, as many know, 30 years later, just 2 years ago. What the fire department did at that time, they said, wait a minute, Gary and folks, they were the UFA at that time. They said, we understand the crisis financially at that time that the city was in. At the same time, the city-run ambulance had just begun. So saying that it was about balance, but the staffing model is pretty much the same 30 years later. The ambulance model, pretty much the same. Nothing really has been tweaked. What Dr. Jennings did do here, he deep dove into the data. He deep dove into the demographics. Back in 96, you can see through the report, the call volumes were 6,000. Fast forward, here we are today, over 13,000 calls. We've become more than just an ALS ambulance service. We're also a BLS, basic life support. We're also transporting, we know, the many nursing homes, many of our apartment buildings are using, our city-run ambulance for transport. They can't say no. We know that. Quickly, I know firsthand, we've called for my son who has epilepsy. We have a second to none fire department. They are the best of the best. Schenectady, Rodney Rosati, who's going to be part of this 90-day task force, and I'll get into that in a couple of seconds, but he's a retired department fire chief over in Schenectady. But more importantly, he was on the state EMS when there was this whole talk 30 years ago about city-run ambulances. So we've become a model throughout the state on how to run an ambulance, but at the same time, we need to obviously look at the cross staffing model. Can we tweak that? We need to look at jumping the rigs. We need obviously our staffing. Presently, we have 124 on our fire department, the max that we're able to have at this point. 118 we are at right now. We're hiring 6, so we'll have 124 with 2 vacant, correct, Chief? Okay. So we'll have 2 vacancies. That does not account for any retirements over the next several months, et cetera. But the good news, we hired, if you recall, back in late 2023, we hired a good 17 firefighters and then 9 last year. So that's, 26 in just the last year and a half, with another 6 tomorrow. So, the question is, how can we potentially change that minimum manning? How can we change the current cross-staffing model? The 90-day task force, we spoke to Dr. Jennings, and Gary will talk about that in a minute. But yes, to your question, Chairman, definitely a cross section of folks. Jeff Ward, UFA member, hopefully, a captain or 2, the chief, Gary, Rodney, who's familiar with obviously the state EMS system, and then the deputy mayor. And that 90-day is put to be finite because we want it to be roll up your sleeves, dig deep into the recommendations. Listen, no shock, calls for more staffing, calls for obviously this cross-staffing model to be changed. But saying that, also, how can we look at that ambulance model, short-term, long-term? 30 years, we are where we are. The good news, the peak run ambulance, we know that that's, through overtime, through ARPA, it's helping. It's putting a Band-Aid. At some point, you have to pull the trigger. That's what this report and the 90-day task force will begin. It's not going to be fixed overnight. I'm not going to mislead anyone, neither are any of us, but you have to at some point take the bull by the horns, and you have to start stopping that hemorrhage. You have to start somewhere. You have to start looking at the ambulance model, the cross-staffing, the staffing in general, and you have to take that bull by the horns. That's what this study does. That's what the 90-day task force will do. Short-term, long-term, yeah, the recommendations in that and more. So that's what this 90-day is all about. It'll be complete in 90 days, basically short-term, long-term, what's low-hanging fruit, and what's long-term in terms of really trying to tackle and address this model. So I want to thank Dr. Jennings for really deep diving. I think the data is critical moving forward when we apply for grants. Don't look at this as, a plan that's going to sit on the shelves. This is a plan that will be useful for years to come. But at some point, you can't keep using ARPA. It's going to run out. At some point, you can't keep the same staffing model, ambulance model. You got to fix it. And so what we're saying here tonight, through this report, through the 90-day task force, we're committed, working with the UFA and everyone, our city, all of you, the council, to fix this issue. So thank you, and I'll hand it over to the chief. Thanks.
Good evening. Mayor just said pretty much everything I was going to say, but the study is it's a good study, right? It like I said before, there's no surprise here. We're understaffed, short-staffed, I should say. And the thing I like about the study is it does reference back to where this all began in the 90s. Councilman Casey got hired with me. There's only a few of us around here that remember those days where literally doors were falling off trucks. So, we made arrangements, concessions, and staffing adjustments back in 30 years ago, and it has gotten us through most of the way. And obviously times have changed. I think the important thing, to realize here is that it has taken us 30 years to get here. It's not going to take us 30 years to get out of it, but it's certainly not going to be 1 year or 2 years. The city, the administration has made a lot of investments in capital improvements for the department as far as vehicles. We're moving forward on the Station 1 up in Lansingburg. So there's a lot of good things. There's a lot of good things ahead for the department. Our staffing, we did go through a staffing crisis, so to speak, a year and a half ago. We've hired 26 in 1 year, and we're putting 6 on tomorrow. So, 23% of our department or so is going to have less than 2 years on, and that's a pretty significant number. So we're hoping that, we can increase basically our overall staffing and our daily staffing. It's going to take, as we said, short-term and long-term planning, and we're only going to be able to do it a step at a time. And I'm looking forward to the task force to get together. A lot of smart people around here that have input, and I'm looking forward to working with them to come up with some sort of plan to get us out of this. I think we're over the hump. We're moving forward. We're on our way to better things. The last couple of years, it just seems that this, the healthcare crisis that's going on in the whole country right now is affecting us, and we just have to make those adjustments moving forward.
Thank you, council members. Retired Captain Troy Fire. I was a paramedic the whole time. I was in the first paramedic class at Troy, actually. I think the task force is a great idea to come off of a study that you just had. Studies are great, and there's a lot of technical information that we'll be able to use, but the mayor mentioned some of the people on this committee, and I've worked with a lot of them over the years, and there's a lot of brain power, I say, in that group, and the ability to create a pathway. It's nice to have a study, but it doesn't tell you how to get there. The economics, the operations, the people that do it, have done it, and do it day in and day out, that have administrated it, can craft something that's going to work for the future. We talked about it today. I mean, the Troy Fire Department is the lifeline for the citizens. And it's 911. It's 3 to 5 minute response time, not 17, 30 minutes like out in the county. The county system's in a lot of trouble right now. It's the Titanic. I'm not saying the Rensselaer County. I'm talking about the agencies in the county. They can't. There's no people. There's no medics. There's no paramedics. There's no EMTs. And people get confused that there's EMTs. That's emergency medical technicians. That's basic life support. And there's paramedics that are advanced life support that go to Hudson Valley, and that's pharmacology. That's cardiology. That's in depth, using drugs and treating people in the field and saving them when they need to have that in the first few minutes. So people get confused. It's like, I call 911, I got a paramedic coming. No, you don't. And in the county, you may be waiting 40 minutes. Not here, 3 to 5. And, but that being said, the system has been taxed. Troy does close to 14,000. I think we're at that number, Chief. And so 14,000 calls. The rest of the county, the whole county only does 12,000. All the agencies in the county. So Troy does 2,000 more than the rest of the whole county. So with the demand is going up significantly here. And years ago and throughout my career, I've worked all over the country, helping EMS agents, work with fire, police, EMS services, municipal, through the state firefighters, through the international firefighters. And I served on the New York State Emergency Services Council. I got appointed by Governor Pataki. So I've been knee deep in this stuff my whole life. And I've had the pleasure to work with a lot of great people that could brainstorm and create a good way forward that's economically sound and operationally sound. Because if we give you something that's not economically and operationally sound, that's not going to work. We have a history of doing that here. And we actually did it years ago when Carmela was on the council, and she worked for Senator Spano. And Senator Bruno was there. Those guys were close allies to the fire service. We started plugging holes, that we didn't have ambulance coverage back then. So we did a Troy home rule legislation, state law for the city of Troy. It was a bipartisan support. We had 3 Democrats and 3 Republicans that Carmela helped put together, that collectively put that together. We did the home rule legislation, and we were able to operate our own ambulances because we were getting blocked in every regard around because of the way the system was set up. That became a statewide legislation, thanks to Carmela and some Rob Rosette, who was on the committee, worked with me on it. So since then, 50% of the municipal fire departments in the state run ambulances. 75 to 80% run advanced life support, and 100% run first response, at least some kind of first responder or EMT. So the fire service has become the lifeline to the people in across New York State. The outlying areas is a different story, but that's where the municipalities have been going. The chief said we had 30 years, we haven't changed it, but we did it through a labor management committee We had 3 chiefs and 3 firefighters. Task force, it's another word for task force, but we weren't going to put something together that wasn't going to work. That the numbers we gave were going to be right as far as the revenue for the ambulance. And it wasn't designed to fund the fire department. It just offset some costs. We didn't get anything for the fire department until we ran transport. The 15 years prior to that, we did all the work, but we didn't, the ambulance services collected the money. So now at least we were able to get that money, offset some of the costs for the fire department. We didn't add any more people. We were doing it with existing manpower. That was 9,000 calls. Now you're at 14,000 calls. So the demand is overrunning the system. These guys are running pretty hard right now. I mean, they're burning out. The system's burning out. There's nobody to replace them. You know, it's getting harder to get people into the paramedic field. The money's not there. The system's in a lot of trouble in this state right now and in the county. Not here. I mean, not here as far as the service, but the demand, we're not keeping up with the demand. But we understand economics. That's all tied into it. There's things we think could be done probably better with billing. You know, we've talked about that with the chief. There's other opportunities here, but operationally, we're still operating from a long time ago. And so again, I think there's a lot of brain power that can put this together. I think for it to be successful, you got to hang your egos at the door before you go in, so you can actually talk openly and hone everything down, throw everything on the board, and get to a point where you can come forward to the council, and the council would be able to look at it and say, okay, this is a good plan that the mayor's understands, and the public can understand too. Because I think the public is confused at times, because in Troy, when you call 911, you're going to get somebody, and they're going to be qualified, they're going to be experienced, and there's going to be manpower with it to handle any situation. And that doesn't exist everywhere. And you want to keep that going, but at the same time, we've got to keep up with the demand. I think that the study said some things about that, but doesn't always say the way to get there. And I think that's the job of the task force, to try to put together a way to get there. I mean, if anybody has any questions, I'd be glad to answer them. I've seen a lot of stuff, but there always is something I haven't come up with.
We're going to have a Q&A session after the presentation.
Okay,
Thank you, Captain Faber.
thanks, Tom.
Quickly, before we hand it off to Dr. Jennings, I did want to hit the wait time for the hospitals. And, you know, I'm hopeful. I know that the New York Conference of Mayors, other mayors, elected officials throughout the state have identified this issue. We know one of our sister cities up north, Saratoga, they're seeing this issue firsthand. I know that they've spoken to a number of Troy firefighters. So this is not unique to Troy. We know that. But our ambulances waiting for an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours. I believe Joe Henkel was with my dad after he fell backwards down the stairs. They were at Albany Med, and I contacted Joe. He was in the ambulance. There was a long wait time. This was 2 years ago. And Joe said, "Don't worry, I'm talking to your dad about the Yankees." So he kept my dad company. My dad actually ended up passing away a week later. But those ambulance wait times are unacceptable. But it's bigger than us. We're not going to address that through this. However, I'm committed to work with elected officials throughout our state and our state legislature to really work to address this issue. But we know it's bigger than us. We know the hospitals are short-staffed. It's dominoing and hitting us at the local level. But it's a real issue, and it must be addressed. This report is not going to address that, but has some data to arm our state legislators to really address and hit this issue. So I'll hand it off to Dr. Jennings. And once again, thank you, Doctor.
Okay, thank you, Mayor and Chief and Captain, for that introduction and the context. I'm Charles Jennings, as was already stated. And so it's a pleasure, members of the council, to be able to present the report. Just real briefly, Manitou was formed in 1999. This is what we do. Fire EMS and emergency management. And we've done studies in, I think, something like 20 23 states and 3 Canadian provinces, from, single station volunteer departments all the way up to major metropolitan career agencies with, populations. Well, we've done work as a subcontractor for Houston and Chicago, but let's get into the study. That's next slide. Yeah. Okay. So we were selected in late 23. Our methodology includes interviewing staff. We did limited observation of operations. This wasn't really an operational study per se. We looked. We had a member survey that was made available to every member of the department, and those results are a chapter of the report. We interviewed and met with supporting agencies, departments, and facilities. And we did interview the local 86 officers, and we met with the executive board. The data for the report was provided by the fire department, also city staff, particularly financial data. And of course, we did considerable data gathering on our own, census data, et cetera, to inform our analysis. And we applied national standards, industry norms, the Insurance Services Office, or the city's insurance rating, as it's commonly known, as well as state and federal regulation. Our philosophy on the way we perform studies is that we acknowledge the reality of constrained resources in most communities. And so we will certainly call out where there are inconsistencies between standards and what you're able to deliver, but we try to target our recommendations in such a way that we acknowledge that and we give you a path forward to improve service, hopefully within your means. Next slide. Thank you. So the 5 major areas covered in the study: staffing and productivity. A lot of that's been discussed, but we'll talk some more about that. Cost control and containment was a major issue. Looking at greater regional approaches. There is some comparative data here from other agencies, both in the area of finance as well as just fire department resources, and then looked at fees for service and revenue possibilities. So this won't be news to everybody here in the room, but just for us as a setting, the cities, after losing population, the city's population has stabilized, which is a very positive development. You have a high demand for EMS. You have a higher than average demand for fires. And so you have a simultaneous high demand on both the fire side and the EMS side, which is not the case in a lot of other agencies. What that means for us is that you cannot neglect either side of the equation in terms of the services you provide. You have to be able to provide both of them. You have a very challenging environment for the fire service. In particular, you have an old building stock. You have a dense multifamily housing, and you have a vacant, a derelict building challenge. All of those things pose additional demands on your fire services. Those demand resources intensely, and there's really no substitute for having those resources when you're dealing in that kind of an environment. You're not talking about a single family house surrounded by a big yard somewhere in a suburb. The city, as was stated, emerged from insolvency. The finances are more secure, but obviously the city continues to be challenged by how to provide services within the cost containment frameworks, the resources that are available. And those are difficult challenges. Those are difficult decisions that are made by you as the council and the administration, and hopefully leveraging this study to help make those hard choices, obviously informed by the task force. And then the more recent trend is a growth. There's a lot of development happening in the city, which is fantastic. But you have growth in senior and subsidized housing, which absolutely tends to be more demanding of services. And so that creates more demand. Next slide. So in terms of the findings, this is kind of our assessment of where the city and the department are right now. The system that exists today, I don't think anybody set out to say, well, this is the way we want it to be. We had the initial design of the system really hasn't been adjusted substantially since the cuts were made in the mid-90s. You took on EMS transport. The staffing level has just been said has been steady or flat, while calls for service have increased. Now, merely having increasing calls for service is not necessarily a problem, but you have such a large increase that it's having an impact on availability of units. And because of your reliance on cross staffing for ambulances with fire companies, that essentially means that those fire companies, because they are less busy than the ambulances, are unavailable a greater and greater share of the time. Current staffing is of the facilities and apparatus have been improved in recent years. There's been a number of investments made in new apparatus, and the firehouse is getting fixed up. And the assumptions that were originally in place, which assume essentially that the ambulance staff are always going to be available and be able to use those resources across both fire and EMS missions, those assumptions no longer hold. And so that is probably the biggest pain point for putting stress on the deployment of the resources. And we'll talk more about the deployment momentarily. Until the last few months, the fire department was operating with a historic number of vacancies. And frankly, we were kind of shocked that they were able to keep the wheels on with that number of people being off and covering all that with overtime. So that's no small achievement. And thankfully the city was successful and they've got their new class out on the floor now delivering service. Next slide. So I'm not going to belabor this, but the response times here, these are averages. This is turnout and travel. This doesn't include call processing. Call processing is the amount of time from when somebody picks up the phone at the 911 center to when the button is pressed to dispatch the resources. So that would be in addition to what's on here. The national standard for career departments, which admittedly is very demanding and most agencies don't meet, is 4 minutes to 90%. And so you can see these are averages, and so you're well above those. And this is in spite of the fact that you have a relatively large number of facilities. So what does this tell us? Well, this tells us two things. One is that the closest unit isn't necessarily always available to respond to a call. And of course, for medical calls, you have fewer ambulances than you do fire stations. And so it's routine that they are responding across fire station boundaries in order to provide service. Additionally, you look at the cross-staffed units, in particular Truck 1, and you see a very long response times. That's a function primarily of that ambulance having to come back to the firehouse for those personnel to staff that unit, usually as a result of a call for service, some kind of a fire call. And so you have delays in getting that unit out. Next slide. And so this is a courtesy of the union, the top right diagram, which lays it out. The blue arrow is call volume. The red line is the staffing. And we look at incidents by type over the last 5 years, actually going back 6 now to 2019. You see essentially all incident types are increasing, some more so than others. For EMS between 22 and 2023, you had a little drop, but it's still in the net increasing. One of the things we did in the study was we were tasked with developing a forecast of incidents for the future. And what you see here, the forecast, and there's quite a lot of methodology that's in the report about that. But what we're really looking at here is a window right now, and you see the blue line is assuming that population essentially remains stable or fixed. The orange line, I guess that's orange, showing a slight increase in population as well as an increased utilization of service. So increasing demand can come from more people. it can also come from more calls for service from that same group of people. And both factors play. So you do have the potential here for a considerable continued increase in demand for service. And we would expect that the near term, you would continue to see those EMS numbers in particular going up year over year. So it's not going to go away. It's not going to get better by itself. Next slide. So to conclude, EMS originally started as kind of an add-on service to your traditional fire model. And as that fire model reflects cuts that have been made, prior to taking on the EMS model, if you put those changes up against the increasing demand for service, that's created the challenges that you face now. And so you have a combination of thinly staffed units. You have engine company staffed with 3 personnel, your ambulances with 2, which is the industry norm, but your ladder companies here in the city are staffed with 2 personnel. Customarily, you'd want to see 3 at a minimum. They should be staffed the same as engine companies. And in some communities, those are staffed, those are the first units to get additional staffing. And that's likewise for your rescue squad, engine 5. Next slide. So major recommendations, and this is not all the recommendations in the report. There's a number of recommendations and findings in there that I think are very impactful, but they're not the top line, and they're not necessarily fiscally is significant. But the first is to move toward implementation, is to form the 90-day task force in order to go through the report exhaustively and to further classify the recommendations and prioritize them, as well as try to determine how you're going to implement them, where you're going to get funding, what potential revenue streams, what potential municipal or interlocal agreements you might be able to pursue to start making some of these changes. With regard to EMS, we were tasked with taking kind of a blank slate look at that, and we recommend that the city continue with its fire-based EMS model. And the rationale for that is spelled out in the report. It's working now, and it offers a number of advantages, particularly given the uncertainties in a private sector EMS provision. We do think, with regard to cost containment, we looked at the potential of reducing the level of service from advanced EMT or paramedic. I'm sorry, from paramedic to advanced EMT. That is a lesser amount of training. There's a slight degradation in terms of the clinical interventions that can be made, but given your call volume and the nature of the calls you have, it is one potential area that could reduce costs. We are not recommending it, but we're putting it out there as something to be considered. We think a basic life support contract ambulance could potentially buy the city some time in terms of getting able to react to this growth in demand and dealing with the cross-staffing issues that you have now. We know that's probably a tall order given some of the traditional and legal constraints, but that's there. The next is to the Insurance Services Office has a rating system for the municipal fire defenses. The city's rating went down from a 2 to a 3. The higher the number, the worse the rating. The fire department is well aware of that, and they're taking steps to get that rating back up to a 2. And that is important in terms of attracting economic development for certain commercial businesses. That can have a direct impact on their insurance rates. It's a lesser so for residential, but that's certainly something that should be considered as you're doing your planning. With regard to staffing, we concur with the city's intentions to maintain Medic 3, which is now a peak hour unit, as a 24-hour unit. We think the demand for service justifies that. We would prioritize the next intervention in terms of field staffing would be to go after Medic 1 and the latter in terms of getting dedicated staffing for those units so that that unit wasn't going out of service as frequently as it does. We'd want to have 3-person staffing on the ladder companies. Two-person staffing on a ladder company is pretty minimal. I guess that's probably the nicest thing you could say. You can't get much lower, but you have a very challenging environment, right? And so a 2-person ladder company is not going to be as effective as a 3-person company. We think there should be a captain dedicated to fire prevention, but not just traditional fire prevention code enforcement, but to move the department toward a more aggressive stance of pursuing community risk reduction, which is the term used now for what's used to be called fire prevention education, but basically using data and to really aggressively target problems around the community to eventually have an impact on driving down the demand for fire services. So you have fewer fires. Right now, you're really only working through the code piece. You're not really meaningfully working on the public education piece, and that's a function of limited resources. Consider hiring a GIS data analyst to enable community risk reduction and provide planning capabilities for the fire department. This may seem like a luxury, but this is really where the action is going. You're going to get a lot of value from that position in terms of being able to manage the data for the fire department, to help target things like fire prevention initiatives, to be more responsive on performance measurement, tracking things like response times, calls for service, units being out of service, hospital waiting times. These are things that it would be very beneficial to have an analyst there. And then a full-time uniform training officer to oversee EMS, fire rescue, and hazmat. You have a very demanding training environment as paramedic agency. That is a lot. And there's considerable paperwork. There's a lot of need for training. One of the things that came out is the desire by the members for more intensive, more hands-on training. And so having a training officer will help facilitate that as well. We'll talk a little bit more about kind of the big picture with that. With regard to external partners, right now the city provides hazmat response services to the county. That agreement has been in place for many years, but it's not particularly lucrative, and it does not cover, for example, the training costs for Troy to maintain those certifications for their personnel. And we think it's not unreasonable that and I understand negotiations are imminent or ongoing with the county. The county is procuring, is actually implementing now a computer-aided dispatch and records management system. As was pointed out, Troy is the major, a major stakeholder, if not the major stakeholder in that system. And so the fire department needs to stay deeply engaged in that, because that has a critical impact on their ability to function, as well as the data they're getting to help manage their services. And then, as the mayor indicated, work with the state to reduce ambulance wait times in emergency rooms, which is absolutely not just a statewide problem, it's a national problem. Next slide. This is just reiterates, I'll leave this up there for a minute, and I'll talk about kind of in the big picture as we're summarizing here. We're almost finished. There's a finite amount of time, and with regard to the management of the department, when we came up, we normally we have a set list of people that we would interview, and we got into our interview the first day, and it said, okay, well, that's great, Chief, it was nice talking to you. Now can we meet the person who does fire prevention? And then somebody comes in. And they said, well, okay, well, who's the chief who oversees apparatus maintenance? I said, well, that's me too. And so people are wearing many hats. Now, is that to say they can't do that job? They're doing it. Is it ideal? No. And the issue you can't forget is that people have limited time and attention, right? And as a manager of that agency, you want them ideally focusing their time where they can be the most impactful. And so, that's where we think getting resources in at the managerial level are going to produce benefits, particularly as you try to do these big picture initiatives of revisiting your deployment, figuring out how you're going to do the staffing, moving to a more preventive oriented stance as an agency. On the field side of things, I want to be very clear. People don't have 24-hour, they're available 24 hours, but there are a number of duties that are done by on-duty personnel. One of the great programs you have here is the vacant building monitoring and marking program, which is substantially completed by on-duty personnel. Excuse me. That's a very important program. People also undertake training while they're on duty. Ideally, training is done in a multi-company or a multi-unit setting, right? It's very seldom that units work by themselves. Because you're getting so busy, those time windows in which units are available and can undergo training are getting smaller and smaller. And what suffers there, particularly important because you're going to have an influx of relatively junior people, fire service, in spite of all the strides that have been made in training, is still very much experiential. You get that experience by, transmitting knowledge from senior people to junior people and experiencing those. So as you have less opportunities for that because you're so busy, those things start to suffer. And so we did have a recommendation in the report to consider scheduling training and bringing people in order to enable that. And we saw that firsthand. There was a multi-company drill, and within 10 minutes, there was an ambulance call, then a second ambulance call, and the whole thing basically fell apart. And then it's like, okay, likewise, if you try to split the shift, as people do, well, we'll do these companies in the morning and these in the afternoon. It's just a workaround, and it's a challenge. And so you're at that level where the ability to do the required training was being impacted. And so there really is a need for either administrative support or more resources in the field in order to enable all these things to happen. And those things don't necessarily show up as a performance measure per se, but they are critical to the success of the agency. Next slide. So this is a long paragraph. I will not read. I'll leave it up for the people in the back. The bold face here, I think, is the big picture as we see it as external consultants who come into the city. And I want to stress that the Troy Fire Department has an excellent reputation. May not be the prettiest agency, but by God, they get the job done. They've got a reputation for good work. I was talking about the equipment, not the members. So they do a great job, and you can't lose sight of that. You can't take it for granted. But you can only get so much out of the resources you've got, and they are getting more and more strained. So the big picture, we'd like to see the department have the capacity to move from a more reactive to a more anticipatory mode. So they're getting out into the community, getting out ahead of problems. This is above and beyond what they're already doing. Complex changes, the issues we're talking about here in terms of demand for service, seniors, EMS. I mean, these are not simple problems, right? These are things that, the white shirts need to be dealing with and working with external partners. And those are things that require a little bandwidth, a little capacity to be able to do it. Again, reiterating the 90-day task force, we think will be very important to go through and prioritize and come up with some implementation strategies specific to these recommendations. But the big picture, the final thought is that by focusing on a shared vision for the future and overall big goals, agreement on the process and policy can be viewed not as ends in themselves, but as tools for moving forward toward enhanced capabilities and managerial capacity. This will enable the TFD to take its place as a leader and leverage its reputation as a hardworking and effective fire department to the next level. So that concludes my prepared remarks.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jennings. Thank you.
Chair, I did want to add two quick things. The insurance, that's report, the downgrade was in 2016. And I'm told by the fire chief, they normally do that every 5 years, but because of COVID, they have not revisited that. But we anticipate hopefully that being revisited shortly. I'm not sure when the state or whoever decides to do it. So that's up in the wings. And I did also want to mention our deputy mayor and general services commissioner are with us tonight also. Okay, so I'll hand it off to you. Thank you.
Okay, great. At this time, we're going to open it up to questions. I'm sure the council members have questions. For you guys here, I just had a couple of questions. I just want to say, in some of the conclusions, there is other models out there. You know, Albany, of course, has a different model than us, even New York City, and that's certainly something that should be in the mix. Not saying to copy, but they've been running successful programs for many years with a different model than we have. Now, I have some questions to start up, but for my sake, it could be just abbreviated. You don't have to totally unpack the answer. If I need additional, clarification, we could do it another time but I just wanted to ask the chief, the hospital wait times, is there anything been done to address these that you know of?
Yeah, there are regional meetings. The REMAC committee meets quarterly. Our medical director, there's meetings, not every month, but probably every other month. It's a very difficult situation. Albany Medical Center has been fined by the Department of Health regarding wait times. And I believe they are making steps for improvement. I think it's gotten a little better. That by no means says it's
Causes? What do you think causes?
I'm sorry?
Causes, what's the root cause? Do you know?
I think it's a lot of things. I think it's staffing, right? They're short staffed. I think it's obviously people utilizing the emergency room, hospitals for their primary. I think not a lot of people, moving into the healthcare. I think you get, honestly, overall, I think you have the baby boomer generation leaving the workforce, right? And that's leaving large gaps in the workforce not being filled by the younger generation coming in. I think that's systemic with our department also, or not our department, but emergency services in general. So I think it's a lot of little things, right? Whenever there's something bad happens and, a ISO or a report on a line of duty death or something like that with the fire department, they examine it, and it's never one big thing. It's always a lot of little small things along the way that add up. And I think that's where we are with this.
Okay. You addressed, Dr. James, the advanced EMT. So I'm not going to have a question, but I'm going to cancel it out, but I do have a statement. I don't think you see what you see here in Troy and other municipalities. If you have a serious EMS call or a car accident or some type of incident, we could have 5 paramedics, 7 paramedics. I've said it for years. I don't think we need that many. If you went in the private sector or somewhere else, you might have 1, you might have 2. Very serious call, maybe 3. I don't think you're going to see 5. I started out as an EMT. I worked side by side with former Chief McMahon. He was a paramedic, and we worked quite well together. We hire firefighters, and they go into schools forever, which used to be a small certification program. Now it's a whole thing. I'm not even sure how long it lasts, but we're hiring people, and they're just in school, and maybe, I don't know, maybe it could take 2 years. Maybe it's a little less to get them online. And I don't think, and we could always have the option, as I did, they put it for me, you may be made to go to school at a different time. So I think it's a great thing about the advanced EMT. This is probably for the mayor. Planning. When we plan buildings, we have requirements, parking spaces. Are we going to start including the impact of the buildings on public safety, both police and fire?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that. On the prior statement that you mentioned, I believe now when 30 years ago, the ambulance model, as you mentioned, Chairman, how many months before they got on the street? 2, 3, maybe? Yeah.
It takes it right now.
Well, now I know it takes 15 months. But 30 years ago, it's 6 months. So you are talking
Right.
a much longer time. So think about it. When we hire those folks tomorrow, swear them in, think about 15, 16 months later, they're on the street. So, that is challenging. Regarding your question, we have talked about it internally. We've looked at other municipalities. It's called essentially an impact fee. Obviously, anytime a building is restored, renovated, like the Lion Factory will mention, Catholic High, you name it, any new building, any restore building, apartment buildings, et cetera, the demographics changing. Other municipalities have what's called an impact fee. To do that impact fee, we would have to undertake what's called GEIS, a general environmental impact study citywide. It will take some time. You can't just initially implement an impact fee without that. We have looked at it. Other municipalities have undertaken it. It does take, I'm talking months, if not more than a year, to actually undertake that study. Somebody outside would have to do it. It's very in-depth. I know Half Moon has, I spoke to their planner. So it is something that we are interested in. We do want to look at. In the meantime, I can state that our fire department now is deeply involved in all of our planning projects. We have undertaken initially, like literally upon taking office, part of the quality of life task force, all the departments now talk before every planning commission meeting, planning board meeting, the task force or the workshop happens a week or two prior. I want to say 2 weeks prior. Jared is Troy Fire's point person, literally meeting with police, with all the other departments, code, general services. Joe Maz is a part of that. The deputy mayor, Seamus, is a part of that. And basically, they're looking at every development. They're weighing in what needs to change here. What can we do to potentially offset that impact without direct impact fee? The impact fee is something we are really interested in, Chairman and Council. It's just going to undertake quite a bit of work to get that impact fee in place. However, we are putting on developers more, I want to say not making it difficult, but that balance that you are going to have 151 units, in the Lion Building, for instance. Yes, was there some input there? Now, fast forward, that was done before my tenure. We are very involved in these planning projects to really get not just Troy Fire, the police and the other departments deeply involved in that project prior to even going to the planning.
Chief Slucci, Dr. Jennings touched on this about training. We all know about it. Hey, you're going to get the training today. You get pulled out of training. Oh, somebody's going to cover for you. You're pulled out of the training. Since you become chief, the UFA said in the survey they were unsatisfied with training. I know the environment. Have you been able to do anything to just secure better training?
The only thing we've really been able to do in the last couple of years is increase slightly the availability of training off duty for overtime, right? We used to, as you know, we used to get 24 hours for EMS training a year. A couple of years back, we split that into 12 EMS and 12 fire. And most recently, we just worked out an agreement with the UFA to increase that to an additional 4 hours for fire training. So 16 hours. Typically what we do is we offer 2 training classes, 2 in the spring, 2 in the fall. Try to get multi-company drills and stuff going at that time. You remember when you were there, it was super difficult. It's 10 times worse. We had just, for instance, a few months ago, we had an electric vehicle blanket we purchased. That's to cover an electric vehicle in the event of a fire. It's a quick, probably not even 15-minute training just to let the guys see it, know where it is and stuff. Listen to the guys come down and they're not even through the training. They're getting yanked out for other calls. It's very difficult to do anything extensive while on duty.
Okay. Now, Mayor, this is the big public safety fee. We have always talked about it for years. Maybe it wouldn't say in that we always talk about RPI, but also it could be in the form of, I always say, it could be in form of something that help offset the cost. Maybe every 5 years, maybe a new fire engine. I said, we'll paint pride of RPI on the building. We'll put it on the fire truck. But just overall, what do you think of the public safety fee?
Couple things, public safety fee, we would love to see some, let's just say, even small public safety fee when it comes to obviously offsetting some of the cost. And, you know, the idea is that that public safety fee, even as small as it might be, say university, $125 public safety fee, which other universities do charge, that even, you know, 2/3 of that go toward infrastructure, go directly into police and fire. Because as you know, it's not just the fire department who are providing those services. I must say, you know, hand in hand with that, we have a new president at RPI. He has made it very, very clear, not just talking the talk, walking the walk, community. Let's just say the prior president, without disparaging, it was a city in a city. The students didn't frequent downtown. There was not a lot of community, not a lot of partnership. When I was council president, I asked for a meeting. I was given literally the community liaison, great person, but there was no way to even get into that office. Now, Marty, he doesn't want to be called president. He wants to be called Marty. He wants to literally transform Troy like Kendall Square in Boston. He's from there. He was at MIT. They made it happen. We have a newly formed, re-energized partnership with RPI. And I do believe, just like the Troy Redevelopment Foundation, $400,000 annually, it has not been increased since its first inception. $400,000, you figure, close to 30 years ago. That has not been increased. That's all the major nonprofits, St. Peter's, RPI, Emma Willard, help me out, St. Peter's, RPI, Emma Willard, Russell Sage, and there's one more in that bunch. What am I missing? Maybe just those four. No, Hudson Valley's not part of it. But needless to say, RPI and the major nonprofits we've talked about, not so much, okay, let's increase that, but let's be more part of the community. Before, the grants that were awarded through this $400,000 were not dispersed all throughout the city. It was very much downtown centric. This time around, we will, partnering with RPI and the others, be appropriating those monies to, like Troy Look, some youth organizations, Lansingburg, and all throughout the city. So those monies are going to be dispersed differently. I know it's small potatoes when you look at the bigger picture, but that's how you have to start out. And I must say that that partnership is going to go a long way. I love your idea. We've mentioned it, Seamus and I, to the president time to time. We'll get RPI's name on one of our trucks. Let's, you know, partner, et cetera. But I do envision greater partnerships, but it has to start, you know, at point A, and we're there. And
Okay.
I do believe that that will grow.
Well, I just have two more quick questions. I appreciate my other council members' patience with my questions. I just want to ask Dr. Jennings, because this has also always been talked about, 9/11 diversion program, and you said it had limited success in the county. Could you just briefly explain what were the issues with that? Because that's always talked about. And maybe explain to people what that is.
Well, this is a national problem and everybody's struggling with it. Some communities have gotten further than others. And I don't want to mischaracterize it, but the county did a pilot where they had a third party that was coming in. And the theory is if you have what medically they call low acuity call. So something that's not serious, right? I've got a non-serious problem.
Yeah.
I call 911. Instead of that resulting in a dispatch of a Troy ambulance, that would go to another party who would end up then either giving some kind of counseling or referral or non-emergency transport alternative to that patient. Now, I really wouldn't want to characterize why that did not pan out, but there are fundamental economies of scale, and there are issues in terms of certifications at the state level to engage in that. And so it's an idea, but it would require kind of concerted action, and that's kind of one of the more proactive things we talk about in order to get some more capacity to be able to do those kind of heavy lifts.
Well, there's no shortage of Medicamps around.
Yeah.
They're everywhere nowadays. Now, my final question, and the chief and I spoke about this earlier. You talked about a no transport fee. In fact, I know a family member recently who is a lift assist on a normal, usually about once a week. They're now getting billed from their municipality, but it's a little trickier, we spoke to you, a little trickier than I thought. What's your thoughts on the no transport fee, that when we don't transport somebody to the hospital, we're allowed now to actually bill for our services? What's your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, I think generally you want to provide signals to users of the system so that they're more sensitive to the costs that are imposing. Now, obviously, anytime you're talking about a fee on someone who's, presumably ill, frail, or whatever, you've got to use some element of judgment there. But those are political decisions. But absolutely, if you look at, facilities that may be neglecting staffing and overnights, and then using 911 services to do things that they should be doing with their staff, then that becomes that's another matter. I think I don't have any problems supporting that. And that's a battle, that has to go on and takes a lot of time. But that's almost an individual discussion between the fire department rep and that facility manager. And when that facility manager gets promoted, leaves, whatever, in 2 years, you're probably going to have to start it over again.
Yeah.
But it's kind of a never ending challenge. And that's part of the structure of the healthcare industry in those homes, those facilities. Everybody's trying to minimize their costs.
Well, thank you very much. And again, I apologize for all my questions, the other council people. I'd like to open it up to the other council members. Questions?
Chair.
Councilman Brosnan.
Doctor, you did the study. There were a couple delays with the study coming out. Do you want to speak to what some of those delays might have been?
Well, I mean, the study was basically under review. Internally, I think there was some consensus building between the city administration and the union, which I think is very positive. And other than that, I mean, it's kind of happens with these things. There's a
It go to 911.
Well, yeah, there was some add-on work to take a closer look at the county dispatch, which put us back probably the better part of a month as
There
well.
was also a delay in the starting with the previous administration.
Well, yeah, we were slow off the blocks. I don't even remember. I was going to look back before, but between between being notified and actually getting the paperwork, it was a considerable period of time. So that's really the nature of that.
All right, thank you. My next question is, I apologize. Currently, the taxpayers can only see the 19-page slide here. Is there a time for when the 177 is already on? All right, cool. You spoke about an impact fee on new buildings coming in. Would that also come on to existing buildings? And if we were to do the EMS fees, would it be able to go on apartment buildings, nonprofits, and colleges, not just the colleges?
First of all, you can't go back. It's going forward. So you can't go back on already developed property and say, okay, we're going to do an impact fee. It would only be on new developments, restored buildings, et cetera. And like I said, undertaking that will take quite a bit of time, and we would have to hire someone from outside to do that. We simply don't have the staff to do full-wide, citywide GEIS, which would be required for that. And Half Moon obviously is much smaller than us. It took them close to a year, and they, have what, maybe 10,000, I don't know their population, but they're much smaller. But they, like I said, have this impact development fee, but you wouldn't be able to go back.
Okay. the minimum manning fee or the minimum, the minimum manning hasn't increased from 1996 to now in your report. It said on page 90 that you're looking to increase it to 15, and that's from a according to NFPA 1710, a low hazard area is what Troy is classified as. Would we better fit into a medium hazard?
Well,
area?
that wasn't characterizing Troy. That was just the illustration of the standard, which requires 15 personnel on scene. And they want them there within 8 minutes, 90% of the time. And absolutely, Troy is not a low hazard community. I mean, there are buildings that would fall under that, but the vast majority of the city is probably moderate or high hazard, given the age, density, and all those other factors. So this is just was there to demonstrate, the need for adequate fire staffing and the impacts of having those ambulances, or the cross-staffed units, if they're not available, that's cutting those numbers down, right? So you're at the point where you're really impacting the readiness for firefighting.
Okay. What is the minimum number for a medium hazard area?
Oh, well, the numbers in the NFPA 1710, basically they give a number based on the type of property. Where they get into explicitly numbers is on unit staffing. NFPA 1710, requires, and obviously it's not a mandated standard, but they require 4 personnel per unit. And they have a kind of a clause in there that for high hazard, that number could be 5 or 6 per unit.
All right, so it's significantly more than 15 then probably based off of.
Well, they're still looking at 15 for the single family dwelling. If they go, and I'm not going to guess at it, but it's in the, they give it a number for strip mall. They give one for a high rise building. A high rise building is in the 40s number of personnel. And I can tell you at that level, very few, a lot of departments, don't have that staffing. And so they would be required to utilize, automatic or mutual aid to get those numbers of personnel on the scene.
Thank you. In your report, you deemed Medic 3 as a high priority. Currently, it's staffed by 2 captains on overtime. Would your report recommend putting 2 non-captains on normal pay into that instead of 2 captains on overtime?
Well, I don't, we didn't get into the staffing in terms of the ranks of the personnel, but we thought that the unit should be staffed. And obviously, if you had the personnel and you didn't have to spend overtime, that would obviously be preferable. But given the staff you've got, you're pretty much looking at overtime in most cases to be able to get those personnel on the unit.
It's also, it's not necessarily 2 captains. I know it's 2 senior members. Could be a captain, could be a lieutenant, could be a firefighter. Could be a firefighter with 30 years on, you know what I mean? So it is overtime, but it's not necessarily a captain all the time. Fluctuates.
All right, thank you. So you touched on having 2 firefighters on a ladder truck not being in line with the NFPA recommendations. Does that open the city to liability if a firefighter is hurt on duty?
Well, you have liability when you wake up in the morning as a city, and you have liability when you go to bed at night. But yes, this is everything opens you up to liability. I'm not trying to be flip, but this is we're swimming in a pool full of liability. That's the reality of the industry that we're in. But the key here is that you're using sound management principles and policies with the resources that you have. And so we believe that Troy is doing that, and we're positioning the department, to lessen that exposure. And so that's our position.
All right, thank you. Troy's currently expanding with a lot of new properties coming in. Was that factored into your report for the forecast of incidents? Or
Yes. Yeah, we did, we had available data, I think it was permitted I think it was filed plans, but we accounted for that, as best we could. But we did go as far as to look at the increasing percentage of the population being 60 or older. And we actually calculated the utilization based on those different age demographics. So we're quite confident that that EMS number is going to continue to increase, even if you didn't have a change in population.
All right. Thank you. That's all I got for the moment.
Thank you, Councilman Brosnan. Anyone else?
Chair.
Councilmember Splain McLaren.
So Chief, you said that, once the new members are sworn in tomorrow, there will be 2 vacancies remaining. Now, once those vacancies are filled, does that mean that all units would be filled to industry standards? Or is that your?
No, there's a big difference when we're full staff, we still have to account for vacations, personal leave, comp time, sick leave, FMLA, train, right, all that stuff. So what we do is our minimum staffing, we have 3 firefighters assigned to every engine company, right? So that's what it is. You're not going to have any more than that. We have 2 firefighters assigned to a truck company and 2 firefighters assigned to an ambulance. That's our minimum staffing. We could, during some times of the year, when early parts of the year, when there's not a lot of vacations and stuff like that, we could run a little heavy. We could have 3 people on a truck company, but typically not. And it's hard to keep the department always 100% staff. And even at 100% staff, they're still out training. So they're still in their training. So they're not
Right.
online.
Right.
So yeah, we're going to have 2 vacancies, but we're still going to have 9 people, 9 firefighters in paramedic school, and then the 6 in training. So they're not going to be counted in our staffing.
Okay.
And just to add to that answer, we do in the report address this, and there's a way to calculate a fill rate for your personnel. Now that varies over time by labor agreement and everything else. But once you come off and you've kind of got it to a position of somewhat normalcy, since you got rid of this huge vacancies, you could go in and calculate that fill rate, which is the number of people you need to have one person on the floor. And ideally, there's always a balance between, on the one hand, people are chasing the head count. On the other hand, they're trying to tamp down overtime. And, where you fall on that, generally people are always, because they want the head count to be lower, is they're always running behind on overtime and filling up those positions. Ideally, the department could calculate and say, making a quantitative argument that if you, increase the table of organization by X, this is what it's going to do to our overtime. And they're going to be, 30% of the time, we're going to be above minimum out in the field. So, but it's not unique to Troy. And you've come out of a very, a precarious time with those numbers of vacancies. I mean, the whole team, we have experts who, work around the country, and we were kind of all scratching our heads at how you were making it work with as many vacancies as you had.
It's these guys out there. And thank you, all of you, for your service. So can we talk for a minute about this kind of hybrid situation on the ambulances, where you might have someone with advanced EMT working alongside a paramedic? Does that free up people to then be out, on the floor? How does that, or is it just that, is that just a matter of being able to more quickly put people on the streets?
Yes, obviously the training is less, but there's other things to consider also. Every member of the department is trained to that level.
Right.
Because there's contract, agreements and stuff with the labor union as far as movement of personnel. So sometimes it gets a little tricky if people have to move, based on qualifications and seniority and all that. So, you know, when Councilman Casey and I came on, there were some things that took place during the time where grievances and stuff like that. So the department at that time decided to make everyone that same qualification to quell that and just make movement among apparatus and units just a lot easier.
Okay.
So there, you know, it's definitely something to look into, but it goes beyond just the surface level of, you know, we're just going to train them a little bit less, and it's a good idea, but there has to be a little bit more to it.
Sure. How, you know, speaking of contract negotiations, how will this study figure into that and going forward?
I guess would be heavily.
Okay,
I mean, right, that's the whole idea, is that we want to put a task force together to make short-term and long-term goals. You know, the union has to absolutely be involved in that, and that's going to be involved in negotiations. So that's absolutely going to be heavily involved.
okay. I think that's all. I actually, can you speak about what would a fire prevention captain, you know, I'm going to be honest, my initial, and forgive me because I've only had this in my hand since late last night and worked until 5 o'clock. So I haven't had a chance to digest the whole thing. But the graphic that we saw where the staffing, it was given high priority. The high priority were all administrative positions. And you know, for instance, the fire prevention captain and the data analysis position and things like that. And I'm not discounting the importance of those things, but it seems to me like the actual, you know, to use your phrase, Mayor, boots on the ground positions are the ones that should be the high priority.
And they are, please.
Yeah, well, on the high priority, I believe the medic 3 staffing was identified as the highest, as the first.
Okay, I
Shot.
think I'm looking at a different.
Uh,
Well, the fire prevention captain was
yeah.
one of them. So
Yes.
can you
Well,
talk a little bit about what that position involves?
yeah, well, I mean, you've got somebody who's doing it along with other duties right now, pretty effectively. Although again, spread very thin. They're involved in, you know, routine code compliance inspections, permitting, you know, all those chores. The one of the benefits of having somebody focused on that solely is that it enables them to do more elective and proactive inspections and activities. They're not just chasing what's coming in over the transom from, you know, planning, like, okay, this is a construction site, I got to get out there. And this is a fundamental tenet of, I would say, you know, progressive fire service management, is to try to drive down fire loss and fire incidents, the numbers of fires as well as the severity, through really aggressive action in terms of getting out into the community to both enforce the code, but also to interact with the public to help them, you know, help them prevent having emergencies.
Okay. Kind of like Smokey the Bear and, you know, forest fire prevention.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so is that something that is lacking a little bit right now? As far as the public education part of that, you know, I'm thinking, you know, you talked about purifiers, and I think I understand the difference between a purifier and something different that, you know, we hear a lot now about like phone chargers starting fires, things like that can be prevented with the public education. Is that something that you would envision eventually, you know, making its way into schools and into?
Yeah, and we do it. We do it kind of reactively right now. Like we go out to the schools all the time. We'll go to neighborhood groups. We were just at the Lansingburg neighborhood meeting last night. You know, we're up in like Griswold Heights and stuff like that. But usually it's when something's organized and they ask us if we can come, because we just really aren't able to plan that out.
Right.
Yeah, but so it's more reactive, but
Right.
Yes.
But this kind of a position would allow you to be a little bit more proactive.
yes.
Okay.
And that would be data driven, right? So as you might go out
Yeah.
now
Yes.
and say, well, they're having a community fair. So we're gonna go there and we're gonna give them the same brochure and literature we'd be handing out at the other end of town, kind of without regard to, okay, well, what are the fire problems in this
In
neighborhood
this neighborhood,
versus
right?
that, it's just, and this could get beyond just pure fire things to, seniors, fall prevention, cooking safety. There are places, departments that have people who do, that are available for families. We talked about the putting people back in bed calls, where someone may be at that stage of life where they are needing more and more supervision. That would enable somebody to say, well, maybe, we could do outreach. Let's talk to the family. Maybe you need a caregiver. Can we connect you to social services and get, in-home, all those kinds of things become possible. And they're doing a great job with what they've got now, and they're covering the kind of the statutory and legal requirements, but they could go further.
And Chair, if I could also just add, at least from myself, the administration, our focus is going to be on the cross-staffing model. That's the priority here. And yes, Dr. Jennings, when we asked him to undertake the study, it's an unbiased study. And anything in here, that is certainly the group that undertook this study. And we all know many of our departments are understaffed, both boots on the ground and, the white collars. We know that. However, at the same time, what this provides, the priority for us, the cross-staffing model and the ambulance model has to begin to change. And that is the boots on the ground.
Thank you.
Councilman Bureau?
You didn't let me say chair. Couple of quick questions. So, and this is touching on something that I think was already answered, but by the chief. But we don't have any AEMTs or EMTs that work for the Troy Fire Department at all, right? Everybody is a paramedic.
Everybody's required to become a paramedic. We do as new recruits come in, they have to obtain their EMT certification first and then go on to paramedic school. So when they are off from school on break or something like that, they do operate as an EMT.
Okay,
But
so an
yes.
EMT is sort of a first step before.
Yeah,
they
you
go
have to
that.
become an EMT before you become a
But
paramedic.
the advanced EMT certification is not part of that.
We do not have
progression.
that, no.
Okay. We currently have two, is it cross-staff? Is that the
Cross-staff
way to,
Apparatus, yes.
two cross-staffed medics, right?
Yes.
Medic 1 and medic 2.
Correct.
And then medic 3 is paid for out of the ARPA and peak ambulance funding.
Correct.
What would be the change in, it would be a change to minimum manning, correct? In order to staff those fully?
Absolutely.
What would that change be? How many more?
If you were to keep medic 3 also,
Correct.
so staff, you would have to put 2 more personnel on medic 1, 2 more personnel on medic 2, and 2 more personnel on medic 3.
Okay, so that would be
Six 24-hour, yes,
And so
six.
how many actual firefighters would that be?
6 positions. 6 positions per day, 24
24.
firefighters, yeah.
And that was am I correct, doctor, that was a recommendation of your study? I think I saw that in the executive.
Yeah,
summary to
that's
avoid
on
cross-staffing.
our, oh, yeah. Well, yes, the short answer is yes. So I'll leave it at that.
Okay. I didn't see any, and perhaps I missed it. It is as Councilmember McLaren said, it's a long document that we received last night. I didn't see any recommendations about equipment or fire stations or any of that. Most of the recommendations related to staffing. Is that correct?
No, that is correct. The thrust of the study was on personnel and productivity. And so we were not tasked with, assessing the equipment, at any kind of level of detail.
Okay. Am I also correct, Mayor, that the peak ambulance funding, I think we had this discussion during last budget season, peak ambulance funding, the ARPA funding runs out at the end of this year?
the end of this year, and for 2026, we'll obviously have to look at not just additional funding, but how to minimize that OT. So,
Okay. Right, so the 2026 budget will not have the benefit of ARPA for the peak ambulance funding. I guess that takes me to revenue. I appreciate, Mayor, that you mentioned the generic environmental impact statement. I think that I've worked in a number of municipalities that have GEISs for various mitigation fees, and while I understand developers don't necessarily like them, I know that they serve a purpose and they seem to do it well. I'd recommend maybe reaching out to Colony as well, as I know they have, not necessarily for fire services, but for other purposes. What other sources of revenue, Doctor, have municipalities that you've worked with, I guess, looked into or adopted in order to address some of these concerns?
Well, let me say that almost every study we do has a line item in the scope to alternative revenue sources. And having said that, if there were easy ones, so everybody would be on them. I think impact fees is a really important one. I don't think there's a strong history of that in New York State. But anecdotally, there's some places that have made it over that hump. So I think, user fees, impact fees, certainly looking at your the educational institutions, which I know is always a difficult situation, but we did collect data from other college towns, college cities in the state to show examples of what's being done. But that is largely due to any goodwill between the municipality and the institution. There's no legal tool to go in and force them to make those contributions. And that's how they view them as contributions. I was the chairman of the Board of Fire Commissioners in the city of Ithaca, which housed Ithaca College and Cornell. So I know quite well, some of the challenges that are there. But those are really the big ones. I think you've got some important regulatory issues with Medicaid reimbursement and EMS transport. Of course, at the federal level, there's a lot of uncertainty about where things are going to shake out with that. But, that's also another big one. We looked at the EMS revenue collection, and we made some suggestions in the report on ways to potentially enhance that a little bit, although we felt it was doing a decent job now, but we offered some additional pointers in that area. So that's really the bulk of it. I mean, there's probably other things in there, but as having been in the industry and has sat on the both sides of the table with this, it's there's no magic money out there for a lot of these issues.
In your experience in the city of Ithaca, how did that did IC end up contributing a set fee per residential unit?
No, it's in the report. We have I think we enumerated what Cornell's paying, and I think we got Ithaca College in there. Of course, I've been out of that community for 20 years, but it's gotten better than it was. But you're really at the the rapport between the community and the institution. There is no, and there's no consistency that, it's based on number of students or square footage of space. It's really whatever, two people go into a room and what they can agree on. But I think certainly, to the mayor's point about a more collaborative view, and I think more, I would, not my department, but more forward-looking academic institutions are understanding the kind of symbiosis they have with the communities they live in. And so, good for the city, it's often good for the institution as well. So there's a lot of mutual benefit there.
Excellent. Thank you.
Chair.
Councilman Brosnan.
Mayor, I just went on the website and typed in firefighter study. I found your press release today. I found the 19 slide document. I went through the first 5 pages and the 177 page report isn't on there. Is there a way we could make sure that
Should
gets
be
added?
up, yeah. I know that Alex, who left this evening, he said it went live. So we'll make sure that the full report, he said was under the fire department's website, under our website. If it's not, it will be.
All right, thank you.
All right. Yep.
Any other questions? I just had a thought, something I was going to ask earlier. I can't seem to find it. Did I see that there was a deficiency in dispatch, a delay in dispatch? Did I see that from the time the call was made till it was dispatched to the, was that document or no?
We
I
had,
couldn't find it.
we highlighted some concerns. When we did the study, we made a request for information on call processing times, which the county was unable to fulfill. And so we did some casual observation, and that's, I think, one of the focus areas that we have for the department, in particular around the new dispatch system that now.
Was there a reason for those delays that you saw, or no, you didn't get it?
No, we have some, there's some information. I'm sorry for the static. We have some information in the report with regard to some of the observations we made. But, you know, in fairness to the county, it was not a full study of their operation. But I think we offered in a constructive manner some suggestions in some areas that the fire department can work with them to improve.
And another question I had was, if we end up, chief and the mayor, maybe even president of UFA, if we end up with some type of major reorganization, how do you see how that affect present contracts that have been negotiated? Do you foresee renegotiations have to take place? Of course, we don't know what's going to happen, but
I would imagine, and I wouldn't say renegotiations, we just started negotiations recently, you know, where and how soon that will, you know, come to a conclusion, coupled with this. There's going to have to be a lot of work back and forth, both on the city and the union's part. You know, I don't know what the changes are going to be. They're not going to happen overnight. So, you know, we'll do the best we can, but I'm sure there's going to have to be something like that.
more questions.
Chair,
Councilman
Just-
McLaren.
should we have more questions? We can
Yeah.
reach out.
Give us, yeah.
Okay,
Yep.
thank you.
And Chair, just, you know, just to kind of conclude this, we all know 30 years, not a lot has changed, the model, the staffing, et cetera. Our city has changed dramatically. We all know that. Call volume, no shocker, but, you know, tonight, we are saying we are taking the bull by the horns and we're tackling this issue together, not the city government alone, not the council alone, all of us together. And it sounds corny, but we have to start now. It's not going to happen overnight, but it's going to happen. You know, Jeff, UFA president, he's made a commitment with us to work together to begin tackling this issue. If we don't tackle it now and we let it continue, yes, something potentially horrific could happen. We've been fortunate, but what we're saying tonight, it's not going to happen overnight. I'm not going to mislead anyone, but I am going to make that commitment on our behalf that we are going to begin tackling this. And we can't just keep kicking the can down the road and putting Band-Aids. That's not happening. And by this, we will have short-term, long-term. But things are going to take time, and we ask everyone, have patience. But there is some low-hanging fruit, and this task force is going to make changes, and it's not us, it's all of us. So, thank you.
Well, thank you very, very much, Chief Salucci, Dr. Jennings, the Mayor Montello, of course, Gary Favreau, Cap Gary Favreau. Thank you so much. Even after you're retired, you've had a long life of public service. Thank you. And This study is online? For-
It will be.
Okay. Okay.
Full study will be up as soon as possible. He thought it was, presentation is, the full study will be up.
So for the people here in the room and people watching online, which I think includes, I don't know why she'd do it, Council President Sue Steele said she was going to be watching from vacation. It is online. And hopefully maybe the union or somebody could provide some firehouses with copies. I think the firemen would like to look it over. And again, thank you for your work tonight and appearing before us. And we're going to open it up if anybody does want to have any public comments. So if anybody has any public comments that they'd like to make, we'll open it up at this time for comments.
Don't worry, Nellie, I got it. No.
Thank you.
How you doing?
Hi.
All right, so I have some
Just state your name.
Jeff Belschwinder.
Thank you.
All right, I have some questions here. So with the portions here of where you went back and through, and we obviously our call volumes about 12,000 or higher. That's about 32 calls per day. A large majority of these would go to the Elliott, the Pines of Heartwood, the Eddy, Marvin Avenue. These are nursing facilities within the city. Why are we not implementing a bed fee? That's already allowed by New York State. You're allowed to do that on the colleges. Public safety fee, it's a fight to get. Why not? Why aren't we going after something that's already available? We have a bed fee. They went just alone to the Elliott 711 times last year to go there. That's either because they're short-staffed, they can't handle the patient, so they call the fire department. You know, it's all the time. We can't have these customers or these individuals in our city abusing the EMS system. And that's what it is. It's absolute abuse of the system. That's like a hospital calling every time they can't handle a patient for the fire department to take them to the next one. So the city really needs to get a handle on this. This is a big thing. We should be if they're not transporting them, there should be a fee immediately placed upon the facility. Next should be nuisance alarms. I saw that in the report. I don't know how many it was. He could pull it up there. I wasn't able to I foiled today for the report. So because it wasn't available online, but on High, Town Colony, great example. They already have it available. They have the format. Lion Factory, you see it all the time on Facebook, social media, Instagram, Twitter. Everybody's complaining. Fire alarms all the time. The neighbors are complaining it's going off all the time. You're going there 2, 3, 4 times a day just for fire activity. How many times for the police department? We don't know. I'd like to see a study on how many times the police department's going out for calls and everything else, see what they're doing and everything. As we just did a study on the fire department, maybe we can get a better understanding of the emergency services in a whole circle here. A couple other things here I noticed here, at 12,000 calls per year, 12,000 calls per year, 32 calls per day. Pay rate for a firefighter in the city of Troy, firefighter medic is about $40,043. That's equate to $21.06 an hour. Dwaynesburg ambulance does 2 calls a day. They're paying their EMTs $21 an hour. What makes you, if you're going to be in a competitive atmosphere coming up here, and that's what the fire service is turning into, a very competitive atmosphere. You got to be able to keep up with this. If you're going to lower the standards, the pay is going to go up. Colony EMS, for an example, full-time EMT, $45,689. These are current numbers. Max out after 5 years, $53,000. A paramedic over there, just paramedic, and this is the best comparison, is there 14,000 calls a year for EMS. 14,000 calls a year, paramedic over there, 61,255. That's without overtime. Just a part-time EMT or part-time paramedic over there is $29.45 an hour. City of Albany, who just took a firefighter from the city of Troy, and there's probably more looking to go because they don't transport they're not a non-transporting agency. Starting pay now is $49,605 for an EMT. That's almost $10,000 more. For a paramedic, with the stipends, $52,305, and they're the same schedule, 24 just no ambulances. What we're seeing in the city here is we're seeing a bunch of abuse of the systems. It's out of control. For years, it's been going on. We should be looking back at the pilots that have been issued and making sure that these pilots are completing up to date what they promised. If they're not, they need to look at revoking that or going back and claiming back the money that the city has missed out on. Again, revisit this bed fee. And, you know, New York State allows 4 different levels of EMS. I don't think he explained in full, like, what those levels are. Advanced EMT, you're not seeing a lot of that. You see a lot of that out there, but that's just one little step below the paramedic level. You can do IV interventions. There's some drugs you can push, 12 leads, a couple other things. But then you got the paramedic that can do it all. So by subsidizing this off, I mean, but the other thing is you talked about lowering the services, bringing down an EMT to an EMT level. I know what's going on out in the county. I was there for the presentations. If you haven't been there for the presentation, March 19th at the Center Brunswick Firehouse, I highly suggest you go and really see what's going on out in the county, get an understand of why the men and women that serve this city are in such high demand and what's going on elsewhere. Because that presentation was an eye opener to how bad things really are. 37.5-minute wait time for a victim of a heart attack out in the county, and then sometimes an hour and 7 minutes for advanced life support to show up. Could you imagine sitting there for an hour and 7 minutes with somebody who's having the worst day of their life on the ground? Either they can't breathe, they're having a heart attack. You got to wait. We don't want to have that in this city. We want to have the best services possible here. City needs to look into the options available, and this bed tax, just looked it up. It's probably the best option for the city. It can be implemented to the nursing homes, the colleges, everything. Public safety fee, throw it out the window. Let's go after the bed tax. Let's go after these newer companies that come into the area here that are coming back into these buildings that are already on the books here. Yeah, the building's on the books. The company wasn't. Now they have to renegotiate here. And the studies of what the impact of what these apartment buildings or companies are going to bring into the city really need to start to be evaluated. You know, mental health in the first responders field is a massive thing. Massive thing. Suicides are up. People are leaving the field completely because of the stress of the job, because they're not home with their families. It's a lot. You know, that needs to be taken into effect here. You know, this study, the one that he did here and stuff that I've saw looks great. Really needs to be brought out into the public's eye, not on a 19-page slide available. So it just shows a little bit, really emphasizing what this city has going on. You're a busy city. You're busy for fires. You're very busy for EMS. And people come here because these companies come here, these companies that look at this, because when you pick up the phone and call 911, it's an inter-facility. They should be picking up the phone, calling Mohawk Ambulance and getting a paid contract with them and not disrupting the city's EMS services. Because for a person that just needs to be lifted up off of the bed and put onto a chair because the nurses can't do it, that's a waste of city resources. So, and it needs to be really addressed. I don't know how else to put this here, but you burn people out day to day. And I could tell you this as a recipient of last year, when I had to call 911 for help, they were there in 4 minutes at my house. They were opening the front door to my house in 4 minutes when I got hurt. So and then seeing what my mother went through out in the county when I drove from Troy to Johnsonville in 32 minutes and the ambulance was just arriving. So I know about the value of these people, and I really need us to invest in it, whether it means revisiting the pilots, seeing what has been not done. And if they're not holding up to their end of the bargain, that pilot, revoke it. Go back and get the taxpayers' money. go back and from this point forward on apartment buildings, please consider a public safety study on them. Make them pay for it. What they're going to do and compare it to the buildings in this city that are having this. You compare it to the Lion Factory, 444 River Loft, or you have 527 River Street, whatever these are. Get a comparison to the size of the building that they're going to be bringing in and the type of people that could be coming into this. Because you have walks of life in every portion of that. So it's a great way to get a study done, and they can do it. Make the building developer do it and present those numbers and start bringing in the fire department and the unions and especially the guys and gals in the field that sees what goes on day in, day out. Have them start to come in. That 90-day task force eventually should be turned into a task force for the city wide. And the other thing I wanted to comment on here, number 2, was the second for the captain's position. And I'm a fire and life safety educator. I went to school for it. All right. I went out, I have my national certification and everything for it. It's not that easy. Educating the public is not the easiest thing in the world. Standing up in front of them, talking to them, teaching them about fire safety and everything. It's easy to talk about it. It's another thing to get it implemented. That those people that go out to the schools, talk to the kids and everything, that's great. Needs to start with a lot of the programs for like housing and everything that are coming into the city. Being able to talk to them about what an actual emergency is. There should be guides on what to do with under certain circumstances and everything else. You know, to start to get averting from these fire alarms, nuisance EMS calls. I stubbed my toe. I want to go to the hospital, because most people today have, and the biggest misconception, and it needs to be brought to the public's eye. The biggest misconception is that people think they call 911 and they get an ambulance. They're going to be letting that ER quicker. It's not how it works. 2, 3, 4-hour wait times, Albany Med, Samaritan Hospital, all depending. Staffing, nurses, all that stuff's leaving. Also, in the industry today, fire and EMTs, they're going to make more money going and working at an urgent care than they are going to be working as a firefighter or an EMT. And that one thing that those urgent cares offer, stable life, not being mandated in, not having to wait if there's a fire in town, or they get caught up on an EMS call, missing their kids going off in the morning to get them off to the bus. All that stuff needs to start being considered. Really needs to start to be looked at. And like I said, the biggest thing I'm going to leave with, the bed tax, and then fire and life safety educators. That's just a New York State course. First part of it's is 2 weeks, 3 weeks, I believe. When I stayed at the National Fire or the New York State Fire Academy and got mine done. So that's big. So, and I part of my job at where I work was as a fire and life safety educator at a college. So I did training, and I know how hard it is to get a student to interact, to understand what to do in an emergency and everything. So, and how to implement those skills. It's very hard. And then the other thing is maybe time within the next contract negotiations, getting in there full-time code enforcement officer within the fire department. That's a firefighter that can implement the tickets for the abuse of the systems and the nuisance calls. Maybe the fines that start racking up will get the systems fixed in the city. Start bringing down call volume. Start the ability there for us to save money. Apparatus. Chief, what did the new engine cost? $950. Yeah, $950. Well, that was what, 3 years old or 3 years purchase out. So an average time for an engine right now is about 3 years, right? You're talking, we got $950 for ours. The average cost right now is $1.4 to $1.6 million. You're talking constant use, constant running. Ambulances are $350, $250 to $350, depending on how cheap you want to go, how much you're going to use and abuse it. So there's a lot of big pictures around this study that we need to start looking at and start to, instead of having we have the long-term goals, we need to have short implemented goals, 15, 30 day, 60 day, 40 day, or 60 day, 90 day, 120 day goals and they seeing where they're being met. And if they're not being met, why are they not being met? You know, this is a big one here. Burnout is coming in this city, and it's really coming. And just watching my friend leave the city was a big thing. An eye opener. Sucked. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Would anybody else like to speak? Not seeing anybody else, I'd like to again say thank you to everybody who spoke this evening and presented this. I want to thank ahead of time the people who are going to embark on this task. Thank you for trying to help the city of Troy and taking your time to do that. Looking forward to reconvening in the near future with the results. So we'll see you then. Thank you very much. At this time, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. Second?
You can't say that.
Adjourn. Thank you so much.